Good day, Dragon Slayers. I am delighted to have with us today Mr. Stephen Bramer. Stephen is a rather remarkable fellow who I've gotten to know relatively well over the last few minutes, just in terms of our shared sense of humor about the bizarre. And Stephen has written a book, as have I. So this is a time that our publisher wants us to show our book. And Stephen's book is entitled The Bonded. And for those of you who are familiar with the podcast, Dragon Slaying is our book. And you will note it's recently been awarded an alleged bestseller award from Amazon. Stephen,
Yeah.
as I shared with you yesterday, I'm fascinated by people who say at our age, I'm not sure what I'm going to do when I grow up. Um,
If that even happens, right?
yeah, right.
Right.
And so part of this is, I believe that to live, we have a binary choice. We either give up or we pursue the heroic imperative. That is, we have a heroic quest, we have a mission or missions, a purpose, and that's what drives us. That's what keeps us going. That's what's driven me throughout my life. What drives you?
First, I want to say thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. What drives me? Um, I don't see it as strictly a binary. I've gone sort of back and forth through these transformations through the course of my life. And to a certain extent, uh, my motivations go back and forth between sort of conformity for other people's benefit and then what I personally am driven by. The things that drive me personally are creative impulses. And this is like, you may appreciate that. This is my therapy, right? I do creative things, music, I write, I draw. This is what, keeps me relatively sane. But I've also been going through periods of life where, for example, when I was going to raise a family, was the primary one. Um, I wanted to make enough money to support my kids well, give them a comfortable upbringing. So it's the conflict between those two things for me. Is there someone else who I think they're the purpose in my life, or am I free to just do for myself and follow my own impulses? So that's the dichotomy for me. And recently, you talk about at our age, and of course, we won't get into literally what those numbers are, right? Um, but certainly beyond teenage, right? Uh, but my kids are grown. They're out. They're moving into professions and things. And so here I am, an empty nester now. I'm divorced, by the way. So I'm pretty much free to do what I want to do. I've got to feed the dog and the cat. And other than that, whatever I want to do. Just
Well, let me tell you a little bit about perhaps shared insights. You said conformity. I've never known how to conform.
yeah.
So I think when I look at people such as yourself and such as myself, and as a psychiatrist, I'm very aware of the full spectrum of human potential.
Hmm.
And I am persuaded that uh, my own gift, as I'm willing to share it to anybody who's willing to listen, is I'm absolutely bitching on multiple choice exams. But
I do pretty well on those too.
yeah, yeah, if life were a multiple choice exam, I'm home free. Uh,
Right.
I tried performing arts, did pretty well at it, but not enough to turn pro.
Hmm.
Uh, I have some gifts as a writer, I suppose. Uh, I've got a decent imagination, and I think what has fueled me is my sense of humor. But I think the other part that I'm very aware of as a kid who has identified, I suppose, as gifted, I was weird. I never quite fit in. And,
Absolutely.
and
Understand.
yeah. And so it wasn't until I was probably in my late 20s that I finally got into rhythm with myself. And as I confess to anybody who's willing to listen, I ultimately learned how to approach women by being a great student of Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart movies. Uh, and I tried to model their moves and sang a little bit and danced a bit, and here I am. So, about you, tell me about your path in specifics.
Well, um, I started out big Catholic family, right? My father actually studied to be a priest for a while. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but early on, there are a lot of problems, many of them centered around my father.
Uh-huh.
So I reached a point around fifth, sixth grade where I was hugely disillusioned by him. And it was kind of an awakening for me. I'd always had a little social awkwardness, tall, thin, in blue collar schools. You got that makes you a mark to a certain extent, that sort of thing. But the real turning point in my life, the first one came when I realized my father wasn't who I thought he was. And this whole belief system then kind of had to be re examined.
So, you discovered that your father was not your biological father.
No, he's my
Oh,
biological father.
oh.
He just was not the God fearing, honorable, truthful person that I'd been led to believe for the first
So,
few
so
years of my life.
you were your view of your role model was undermined.
Absolutely.
You were
Complete
disillusioned. At what age did that occur?
fifth grade.
So we've got a kind of a binary choice as we grow up. Uh,
Hmm.
Relatively few of us are endowed with the perfect model. Uh,
Hmm.
I I had I would say a kind, very bright father and a kind, narcissistic mother who was. I mean, she when she was on her game, she could command a room, uh,
Hmm.
which she did. We refer to her as the general, but not quite. But she was really a force to contend with. And I
Uh-huh.
think I became a psychiatrist because at age 13 I had to learn the martial arts of how to contend with my parents without openly rebelling because my dad had unfortunately he was significantly older. He was about 47, 48 when I was born. And by the time I was a teenager, he had pretty advanced heart disease. And,
Mm.
I learned the lesson that I didn't want to make dad angry because he might die. So
Oh, yeah,
I learned gentle diplomacy, but you were disillusioned. And I think the crossroad at that point we can take is we can get angry or we
hmm,
can decide, well, that's a great negative model. I'm not going to go down that path.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, my first reaction was to get angry.
Right.
I, I rebelled, you know, um, and so I went through that period. But I was going into depression, various things. Not that in that environment they didn't take kids to psychiatrists or psychologists. You just it was something you had to deal with. You didn't never diagnosed or anything. So it's just something I had to figure out how am I going to live life now, and just running around every night and.
Now, just a bit about your culture. When you say
Uh-huh.
your name's Bramer
Mhm.
and that your dad was really strict, I'm assuming that you're a Germanic Catholic.
Yes, my mother was the one who was. When we say strict, when you say strict, he wasn't as involved in child rearing as my mother was. I mean,
Right.
his word was law if he decided to lay down the law, but mostly he was just not involved.
Hmm.
He was abusive, and I'll leave it at that. Um,
How was your mom?
well, my mom was not a Catholic. She converted at my father's request. She was extremely intelligent. I think that my mother, I'll backtrack a little bit and say my father advertised himself as a minor prophet and the arbiter of truth. So he was the narcissist.
Hmm.
She was extremely intelligent. I believe I got my facility for language, such as it is, from my mother. And she ultimately established the model of how one thinks through things, works
She,
through things
she
in
was
life.
kind to you,
Well, she wasn't a huggy person,
but she was
but
kind.
she was kind and she was always there for her kids
How
when they
many kids
needed
were
her.
there?
7. One stillborn, so there would have been 8.
And where were you in that sibship?
Second oldest boy.
Oldest boy. And how long did mom and dad live?
Oh, they just passed, both of them, several years ago. They had been divorced for a long, long time.
And
My father walked out on her at one point.
but you affiliated with mom after that.
Very much so, yeah. After he walked out, which surprised her. She thought I was going to take his side for some reason.
So one of the hard things when we're growing up like this, did you ever get a sense that any one of your parents or your sibs approved of you, appreciated who you were?
Well, yes. This is, you talk about being gifted and all that. In Catholic grade school, they gave us an IQ test around the 5th grade. We had moved from a really fundamentalist parish to a more liberal one in
Uh huh.
Omaha for whatever reason. So there were young nuns and stuff, which is part of my life story when I moved to the new place. But they gave me an IQ test, and I did well, extremely well. The nuns were not supposed to tell, but they were concerned that I wasn't reaching my full potential. So one of the young nuns reached out to my mother and told her this, and she told my dad, and this, I was a huge little. It was it was a huge honor, and in my family, I was suddenly. Dad would hold forth at the dinner table, and the only person who could answer, as long as I was pretty much in agreement, was me, and everyone else had to be quiet and listen because my little number on my little test validated his gene pool or something, you know. So yeah, and my brothers and sisters, they admired me, and also it kind of irritated them that, I mean, got tired of hearing it, you know.
So you were Joseph.
I guess I was,
Yeah.
except very early on, my mother pulled me in to deal with this because I could talk to my father, in her view.
So you were the ambassador.
That's what she pulled me in to do. And we had a family meeting between the older kids and the two parents. And I had a big debate with him about whether his behavior was appropriate.
Hmm.
And he allowed that he would stop. So on the surface, I appeared to win the debate, which was not
There,
true.
there must have been payback.
Well, there was between me and my mother. I mean, we had mixed feelings. She had mixed feelings about feeling that she had to pull me into this, that she could not navigate this as the other adult. So there was some harsh there were some harsh feelings on her side. I was irritated that I got pulled into it, and I did not acknowledge this.
How old
I
were you?
5th grade. I was well into adulthood before I looked back on my behavior.
Okay, so if you're a gifted child in the 5th grade, you're barely 9 years old.
I I'm going to take your word for that because
Yeah.
I
What age were you when you graduated high school?
I dropped out of high school because I was into music by then, and I was going to get Bob Dylan's job, so I didn't need an education. But it was 72, 73, I would have graduated. So how,
Okay.
in the neighborhood of 17, 18, something like that.
Okay. Good. So you were going to be Bob Dylan.
Yeah, well, actually, I used to say I was going to be John Lennon. I was going to get John Lennon's job, but then after what happened to him, that seemed to be pretty insensitive, so I stopped saying
So
that.
a bit of trivia. Uh, my life ultimately led me to the position of I had a running buddy who turned out to be governor, uh,
Mm.
Governor Babbitt,
Oh,
and
really? Yeah.
I was between jobs. I had part of my background is I'm a physician, but a physician executive. I have the equivalent of a degree in anthropology and also through the American College of Physician Executives, kind of an MBA equivalent. So I had been the medical director of this large health maintenance organization, and I inherited uh, a real asshole as a CEO.
No, no.
And I hope he's not in the audience, but uh,
It doesn't
anyway,
sound like you guys are still friends anyway. So,
anyway, but I had some real credibility with my physician colleagues and mobilized the team, and we had about 220 docs, and we were going to deliver a reasonable profit. But what I wanted was to set up a quality organization and
hmm
have sufficient funds to recruit really talented people.
hmm
Well, the CEO undercut me in some budget negotiations in Texas, and we didn't have the kind of salary scale that I felt our doctors warranted. And this was not self-serving; it was just to get a decent team on board. So I resigned, and I was out running one day, and my then wife said, "Hey, the governor's on the phone for you." And so I got this job offer. Unfortunately, uh, Governor Babbitt was a delightful fellow. I mean,
hmm
he was not he was conscious beyond what you would expect a politician to be. Bruce was far too bright. It was reminiscent of Don McLean's Vincent song.
Yes.
Yeah, far too
Mhm.
sensitive for this world.
There you go.
It always amazed me that he survived. Well, he didn't really survive in politics. I think the
hmm
long knives got him, but he was a really delightful person and somebody that I feel blessed that he could recognize me. But he was a lame duck governor, and the guy that succeeded him was a Pontiac dealer, used car dealer essentially, who had this belief that by the time at the time in Arizona, our funding for compassionate services like mental health and substance abuse and so on was at the very bottom of the entire country. We were
hmm
lower than Nevada and Mississippi, and
Wow.
and Governor Meekum contended that if we had the kind of program that I'd like to advance, that everyone from Illinois and Nebraska and Minnesota and Michigan, when it really got cold, would
hmm
just kind of slip down the country into Arizona and be his responsibility, and he would have none of it.
Uh,
So,
I lived in
so
three of those states, by the way, that you listed, not Arizona.
anyway, so I was doing for about 2 years a rearguard battle against a legislature. Oh, by the way, if you ever consider going into politics, don't. You're too smart. There's a ceiling on
This might be why
intelligence
I have it, you know.
that if you're above that ceiling, unless you're extraordinarily talented and charismatic,
But,
you can't really make it as a politician because you can't be too smart. People will be suspicious of you.
mm,
So I endured 2 years of that, and then I said to one of my mentors, actually the guy who originally hired me uh, to be part of this physician partnership that ran this health maintenance organization, had morphed into a director of health services for the state. And he was a guy that I think, along with Governor Babbitt, facilitated my role there. And I talked to Don. I said, Don, I'm thinking of resigning, but I've been told by all my mentors that when you resign, that should be a performance. It should not just simply, you should not go quietly into that good night.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'd like to write an op-ed piece. And he set me up with a buddy of his, who's the city editor of the Arizona Republic, like the only paper in town. And I penned an expose, submitted it on Friday. The expose, I resigned on Friday. The expose was published on Sunday. And it was, if you want to look it up, it's called The Shame of the State. And I talked about just the whole level of challenges of giving compassionate services in the state. Well, then right after that, I had a groundswell of political support. I should have run for office then.
That was your minute.
I will tell you this, that the peak of my political career was when I was in the fifth grade, and I was captain of the soccer team and basketball team, and my classmates wanted to make me president of the fifth grade class. And
Mm-hmm.
the strategy as a fifth grader in those days is that you don't actively campaign because you'll be seen as far too ambitious. And I ran a non-campaign and became the president of my fifth grade class, and it's been downhill ever since for me politically. But
I was president of the civics club. We did have to campaign.
anyway, I found myself, this gets to Bob Dylan, being asked to lead a march on the Capitol. So there was 10 to 20,000 people behind me on this march. And I'm supposed to make a speech. And I had a buddy who had a guitar. And so I figured rather than make a speech, I sang Blowing in the Wind.
Oh, you can sing. You have a good singing voice?
At that time I did. It was actually fairly decent. And so, we sang Blowing in the Wind. Well, the next year they asked me to do another march and lead another march and give another speech. So I remember at the time when I got up to the podium, I said, those of you who have memories of last year can appreciate this. Several of you have come forward and asked me to give an encore and sing. However, the vast majority urged that I not.
That's pretty much the story of my singing too. I can relate to that.
Yeah, but I sang anyway.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Well, I'd like to know a little bit about your book. Tell me about your book.
Well,
And by the way, you are such an engaging guest that
thank you.
I would like to pursue this again, perhaps next week if it should work out. But
absolutely, I'll make time.
Okay.
I'm enjoying the conversation too. The bonded. The basic idea is there is an evolutionary offshoot of humanity. This has been true since prehistory, and this is based on some mutations. The key factor among the bonded is they have a communal mentality, a communal mind. So each member of the bonded they can tap into this community mind, the hive mind, or they also have the traditional individual human mind. So they've got this sort of mental dichotomy going on. There's a family. The book talks about the very first person who showed the abilities of a bonded person. He's the tree man, way back in prehistoric times. Neanderthals are still running around. But he had some family. This is very early on. There are a number of mutations. Only one, the mentality thing is the one that carried forward, but the very early members had some other things. One of the daughters had the ability to turn off aging in herself, which essentially made her immortal. So she goes through history and we see her at various different times. She's in the concentration camps. Even further back, she's seen as a witch in,
So
earlier.
she's had multiple incarnations.
Absolutely, yeah. Although technically one life, you know. But
And she's actually conscious of these prior lives.
absolutely, because she knew about the original bonded guy.
So
His thing
she was a
was that
clear,
she was. I'm sorry.
a clear, a
Yes, yes.
spiritual person that could transcend time. You know, it's so interesting that you mentioned this. Uh, you might want to take a look at some of our prior podcasts. I'm attempting for another book to, and I've got a wonderful co-author, Jessica, which is a compelling, attractive lady. When I have her on, I'm sure that all eyes go to her rather than to me on the screen. Uh, but she and I are in the process of writing a book about the connection between spiritual awareness, God, and the pursuit of the heroic imperative. And
Oh,
in my view of that is that, and she and I share a belief in an offshoot of the science of neurotheology. That is, there are elements in our brain, in the amygdala and the hippocampus in particular, and if you add that with the frontal cortex, it has this unique capacity for spiritual experience. It's that element in the brain that might experience hallucinations.
mm-hmm,
It might be that important element of the brain that allows us to have that intuition that we experience. It is an element that I believe, I don't know if you're aware of the research, when we die, the brain has a surge of activity after
mm-hmm,
we die,
yeah.
which may have something to do with the transition. And then if you read authors like Raymond Moody and Ian Stevenson, I'm sure you probably picked up on, and you look at the studies in reincarnation, it's probably there. But as I read the Bible, and by the way, the other partner we have in our podcast is a biblical scholar,
Oh, really? Mm-hmm,
an Orthodox Jewish man who's my cousin, and we kind of connected later in life. I had left Detroit when he was a 13-year-old kid, and we've subsequently bonded. He's absolutely brilliant. He's written a book
mm-hmm,
called The Rainbow Covenant, which relates to the time when Noah had parked the ark and God said, "Okay, buddy, you've done it, and I promise to you and all of your generations that follow that I will make a covenant with you if you adhere to these 7 cardinal rules, out out of which the 10 commandments grew." But when you read the Bible, as I read the Old Testament, and particularly when I read David, Psalms, you almost get a sense in reading that David is in a genuine, ongoing dialogue with God.
mm-hmm,
It's almost like uh, one of the areas that I love to hike is Bryce National Park.
mm-hmm,
What's cool about, I don't know if you've been there, what's cool about Bryce is that as opposed to the Grand Canyon, Bryce is relatively level. That is, you can hike through the park, through this canyon, without having to worry about, well, if I go downhill, oh my God, I'm going to have to go uphill again.
right.
uh, but I almost visualize, as you speak of the 23rd Psalm, as I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, thou art with me. And
Mm-hmm,
it's almost like, yeah, David, God was with you, wasn't he? And
mm-hmm,
it was like when you read that, you read some of the prophets in the Bible, these guys were in regular communion
mm-hmm,
with the Lord. There was a special level of consciousness, which I think we can get to if we get away from the cell phones, the other kinds of things that distract us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your
Mm-hmm.
book sounds wonderful. I'm going to have to end this for now. I hope this has been enough of a teaser that those of you out there who would like to hear more from Stephen, that you'll follow up with us next week. So be well to you all. Take a look at Stephen's book. It's available on Amazon, right?
Many platforms, but Amazon certainly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And it's available in all sorts of formats.
Yes. And if they search for the bonded Stephen with a PH,
Uh-huh.
Bramer, it should come up.
Okay, Stephen, Bramer.
Correct.
Do
Mm-hmm.
you have a website that you want to promote?
I do. I believe it's StephenBramerTheAuthor.com. I
Okay.
should I should have that URL in front of me, but I think that's it.
All right, Stephen, we will be in touch again. It has been a delight to have engaged you, and you sound like a wonderful fellow.